Morning everybody, welcome to the New England tablelands in northern New South Wales. Today I'm going to show you how to start a Lanz Bulldog D8516 from 1949. The 8516, 85 means it's a 35 horsepower, the 1 means it's an export model, and the 6 means it's a 6-speed. And there's something very specific that gives this machine away as a 1949 model. I'll show you in just a second. So come over here, I'll show you what we need to do the full process. So we're going to go through the whole process here, as recommended by the manual. You can actually buy reproduction manuals offline. A company called Plow Books sells the manuals. Very handy. It's got an original manual for the, not an original one, a reproduction manual for this tractor. So to start a Bulldog, you've got to preheat everything. When I bought this tractor about a year ago, I looked online. There's lots of videos of people starting Bulldogs, but no actual explanation of how to start a Bulldog. So I thought I'd provide one. So normally, you've got to preheat everything. Normally I would use the old gas torch, but for the sake of authenticity, today we're going to use the original petrol-powered blowtorch. I actually had this running a minute ago, and oddly enough, to start this blowtorch, to preheat the tractor, you actually have to preheat the blowtorch. The blowtorch runs on petrol. I just put some in a minute ago. You preheat it with a bit of metho. So we'll get that going. It should be fairly warm already. I just gave it a test to make sure it was going to run. So we'll get that lit. That's good. Put that on there, and we'll let that preheat for a minute until we stick it in the tractor. Now, one of the other jobs you have to do with a Bulldog is pre-oil it. Now, to pre-oil a Bulldog, the process is you put the throttle to full throttle so it ports maximum amount of oil. Then you swing the engine around until the grease nipple is facing forward. Right there. The grease nipple forward. You plug it in here, push it in, and give it 160 cranks, fairly slow cranks. Now this does 3 separate jobs. Firstly, it takes fresh oil from the oil tanks, and I'll show you where they are in a second, and pumps them around the crankshaft onto the main bearings and the big end bearings and what have you. That oil dribbles down into the crankcase, which is then scavenged by this pump, most critically. So there's a puddle of oil in the bottom of the crankcase. It's scavenged by the pump and returned to the second oil tank. From the second oil tank, this same pump takes that oil and pumps it onto the piston and the gudgeon pin. So by having this grease nipple facing forward, it allows some of that oil dripping onto the piston and the cylinder to lubricate the gudgeon pin, the rest pin on the crankshaft. Now you only have to do this if the tractor's been parked for a few days. I actually had the tractor running this morning, so it probably doesn't need all the pre-oiling and everything. I'm not going to give it the full 160 turns. You do want to make sure, most critically, you want to make sure that the crankcase is empty of oil. Because if there's oil or fuel sitting, sometimes fuel can leak through into the bottom, sitting in the bottom of the crankcase. Remember, this is a 2-stroke engine. It's a 10.3 litre single cylinder 2-stroke engine. And being a 2-stroke, it breathes through its crankcase. If there's oil or fuel sitting in the crankcase, that fuel can get sucked up into the engine and the engine can run away on you. And that gets very exciting. There's a few clips on YouTube of these things running away. That's not a good sight at all. So we'll make sure there's no oil in the bottom of the crankcase. But I've just had it running, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Let's see if this torch is ready to burn. It should be nice and hot. Make sure it's pumped up. There we go. We'll open all the little doors. Hang this unit right here. Now we want a nice blue flame, preferably. Not a big red flame. The blue flame is hot. Alright, while that's doing that, Next thing we've got to do is grease everything. I think that got most of the grease nipples, probably a few I missed. Now let me show you the oil system. To check the oil in this, you've got two dipsticks. One will be full of clean, fresh oil, not that one obviously. And the other is full of the used oil. So the clean fresh oil gets pumped around the crankshaft, and the used oil, see, here's your clean oil, a little bit on the low side, a little bit right. This gets pumped around the crankshaft and is scavenged and returned to this tank. This is where you fill up the oil. This is the fuel cap. Right now I'm running this on a 50-50 mixture of sump oil and diesel. Seems to run fine, uses up the sump oil. The oil I'm just using 10W40. Just because that's what I buy by the 44-gallon drum. Right. This is the atomizer. For normal running, you want this screwed all the way down. That makes a nice cone of really atomized fuel. If you have to run the machine at idle for an extended period of time, like you knocked off for lunch or you've got it on display at a show, you can open this a couple of turns. And that squirts the fuel right down into the bottom of the hot bowl. It keeps the hot bowl hot. If this is on its normal position, the hot bulb at low power settings can actually get too cold and the engine will start to quit on it. So we'll turn the fuel on here. Open that valve there. This one's actually got a little secondary valve that the previous owner put on here. I'll set the throttle to about halfway. Make very sure it's in neutral. Take the steering wheel off, the steering wheel starting. Now in early 1949, the German government got tired of people getting their arms and legs torn off and steering wheels being thrown through the roof. So in 1949 they outlawed the steering wheel starting. In 1950 they changed all this such that you had a thumb wheel on the flywheel and you didn't use the steering wheel. But in the interim, Lanz put this frame on here to hold the steering wheel, at least a little bit safer for starting. So this frame gives it away as a 1949 tractor. Now you want the hot bulb so it's just starting to glow just a little bit orange. If you try to start the thing too early, before it gets nice and hot, then you'll find it flooding the engine and it could be a real bad start. If that happens, you can unscrew this plug right here and vent all that excess fuel out. This is actually a fuse plug, so if you run out of coolant and the engine gets too hot, it'll actually melt that fuse plug and release compression and the engine quits. So it's a bit of a safety plug right there. Tractor has shutters, radiator shutters, so you push the lever forward on this one, it blocks off the shutters inside. Pull the lever back, it opens the shutters. To help warm up the tractor, close the shutters. Some tractors are the reverse, pull to close, push to open. This is push to close, oddly enough. When we're starting this thing, This tractor, for some strange reason, almost always starts in reverse. I don't know why, 80% of the time. So you've got to be very careful once you started it. If it is actually running in reverse, the book says you've got to make sure you turn it around as soon as you can because the oil pump isn't working. There's a lot of debate about whether the oil pump is pumping oil or not. To stop it and turn it around, you pull the throttle back to the cutoff, wait till it's almost quit, and then open the throttle again. And if you catch it just right, you can turn the direction. I'll probably have to show that to you shortly. This here's the priming lever. We're going to give it a couple of shots of prime, and then I'm going to bounce it left and right. There's no way in the world you're going to turn this thing over top dead center. Not 10.3 litres of 2-stroke diesel. So all you do is you bounce it. Don't try to force it because it starts by kicking back. Usually when you're hand cranking things, the absolute worst thing you can have is the engine kicking back on you. Well, that's how you start a Bulldog, is by making it kick back. So don't put your thumbs in. Be very conscious of this thing kicking back because that's what it's going to do. So all I do is I roll it and let it go, and roll it and let it go, roll it and let it go, and just bounce it backwards and forwards. When it hits, sometimes you've got to give it an extra couple of shots of prime just to keep it running. About halfway seems to work well. We'll see if it's hot enough. Neutral, couple of shots of prime.